3 races into the 2026 season, Max Verstappen could not get out of Q2. He qualified 11th at Suzuka, 3 places behind his rookie teammate Isaac Hadjar. The car was undrivable. He was beyond frustrated. That was March. 5 weeks later in Miami, he qualified second, 1/10 off pole, splitting the grid ahead of both Ferraris and both McLarens. Red Bull changed 7 parts on the car and replaced the entire steering rack. The real story is the one that connects those 2 facts. It was January, and Verstappen was rolling out of the garage at the Circuit de Barcelona-Catalunya for the very first lap of pre-season testing in the RB22. Before the car had even finished a full run, he reported something on the radio. The steering felt wrong. Not wildly wrong, not falling apart wrong, just wrong enough that the front of the car was not turning the way it should. Red Bull's engineers noted it. They looked at the data, and they could not find anything clearly out of place. That first feeling would take nearly 4 months to fix. The reason it took that long is the part worth understanding, because it explains everything about Red Bull's start to the season and everything about what changed in Miami. The RB22's front suspension, like every modern Formula One car, is built with airflow as the main goal. The shape of the suspension arms, the position of the steering rack, how the uprights connect to the wheels and tires, all of it exists to do one thing: control how air reaches the floor and the underside of the car. What the driver actually feels through the steering wheel comes second. It has to fit inside whatever shape the aero team needs. When that system works right, the trade-off is invisible. The driver turns the wheel, the car responds, and nobody thinks about the engineering underneath. When one part inside that system breaks, the problems spread outward in ways that do not lead back to the real cause. The car understeers in one corner, snaps into oversteer in the next, and behaves in a completely different way from one session to the next without a single setup change. Every time the engineers adjust ride height, rake, or wing angle, the broken part creates a new problem. The team chases setup fixes for an issue that is not a setup issue, and they cannot see it because the data says the steering rack is working within its normal limits. This choice to treat it as a setup problem rather than a hardware problem seemed fair at the time. It was not. Red Bull went to Melbourne for the opening round of the 2026 season, with the steering issue still there. Verstappen crashed in Q1 and started 20th on the grid. He fought back to 6th on Sunday, a solid result in a messy race won by George Russell. Hadjar, in his Red Bull debut, had qualified 3rd. For a moment, the car looked like it could fight for the top 5. China wiped out that hope entirely. Verstappen qualified 8th for the sprint, 1.7 seconds off Russell's pole time. Camera footage from inside the car showed constant steering fixes through the high-speed Turn 1 complex just to keep the car on the racing line. He qualified 8th again for the main race, then retired with a separate technical failure. The data showed he was losing an average of 1.7 seconds per lap compared to the race winner during his time on track. And that was not even the worst weekend. Suzuka was the lowest point, a circuit Verstappen had won at 4 years in a row. He was knocked out in Q2, qualifying 11th. Hadjar, in the same car with the same steering hardware, managed 8th. On his cool-down lap, Verstappen came on the radio, sure that something had failed, because the car had suddenly become impossible to drive. Afterwards, he could not even find the right word in English for what he was feeling. Beyond frustrated, beyond angry, just done. After 3 rounds, the 4-time world champion had scored 12 points. Red Bull's own team principal, Laurent Mekies, openly admitted the team was missing pace in too many areas, and nobody inside the building was happy with where they stood. There was a 5-week break before Miami, and during that break, Red Bull's engineers finally found what Verstappen had been telling them about since January. They did not replace a single part in the steering column. They replaced everything. The complete steering rack and all of its linked parts were swapped out during the spring break, making sure every possible cause was covered rather than betting on one single piece. The problem, as Red Bull's technical director Pierre Wache later accepted, was that while Verstappen had flagged the issue from his very first lap in Barcelona, finding the exact cause and then building a fix was far harder than anyone first thought. The reason for that difficulty goes back to how every modern F1 car is built. The entire suspension is shaped to be best for airflow, so the steering system, the suspension arms, the uprights, all of it is designed first to manage how air moves around the car. When one part of that chain breaks down, the effects do not stay in one place. They stack up across every other system. Pull one thread, and you risk messing up the aero balance of the entire car. That is the key point. The steering fault was not creating one clear problem. It was creating a chain of knock-on effects that changed every time the team touched any other setting. Red Bull were not just running a slow car. They were running a car where the steering issue was hiding the real picture. It made it impossible to know what the actual flaw, the actual side pods, the actual aero package could truly do. And that brings us to the second piece of the Miami turnaround. Because alongside the steering fix, Red Bull rolled out one of the largest upgrade packages of the Miami weekend. The FIA's official upgrade list showed 7 separate items for the RB22. The headline piece is Red Bull's own version of Ferrari's Macarena rear wing. Ferrari opened the season with a rotating rear wing part that flips through more than 270 degrees when the active aero system kicks in on straights, flipping the upper and lower surfaces to sharply cut drag. Red Bull's version rotates roughly 160 degrees in the opposite direction to Ferrari's, with a wider opening angle described as even more extreme than the original. The design was built on its own at Milton Keynes, well before anyone at Red Bull saw what Ferrari had done on track. The side pods are completely new. A steeper ramp on the upper surface pushes airflow harder toward the rear of the car. This is Red Bull admitting that the smaller side pod update they brought just one race earlier at Suzuka had not worked. The Miami version is a fix of a fix. The floor carries a new shape designed to pull more downforce while keeping the airflow behind the car stable. Red Bull tuned the front wing and end plate, including the dive plane, for more load. They rebuilt the brake cooling ducts and reshaped the engine cover to match the new side pod profile. Then there is the weight. The RB22 started the season roughly 12 kilograms over the 768 kilogram minimum. The Miami package roughly halved that extra weight. Red Bull are aiming for another weight cut at either the Austrian or British Grand Prix to finally reach the legal minimum. The combined effect of all 7 items, by Verstappen's own estimate, almost halved the gap to the front runners. If you are finding this useful, hit subscribe. More F1 technical breakdowns land here every week. There is one detail in this story that most of the coverage skipped past entirely. Red Bull did not simply load all of these new parts onto the car and roll it out for the first time on Friday morning in Miami. Before the team flew to Florida, they ran the full package at a filming day at Silverstone. The complete upgrade: Macarena wing, new side pods, new floor, rebuilt steering, all of it on the car, on a real track, with Verstappen behind the wheel. He felt the difference right away. That might sound like a small detail. It is not. Miami is a sprint weekend. Teams get a single 1-hour practice session on Friday before sprint qualifying begins. Rolling out 7 new parts and a rebuilt steering system for the first time at a sprint weekend leaves almost zero room for mistakes. If something does not feel right, there is almost no time to react. The Silverstone filming day turned that gamble into a controlled test. Red Bull arrived in Miami already knowing the parts worked. The car handled well, and Verstappen was comfortable. Friday became about fine-tuning the setup, not finding out whether the car was a different machine. On Saturday in Miami, Kimi Antonelli took pole position with a 1:27.798, his third Grand Prix pole in a row. Verstappen qualified second, 0.166 seconds behind. On his final fast lap, he was actually quicker than Antonelli through the opening sectors before the time slipped away in the middle and final sections. He finished ahead of Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, and George Russell. It was Red Bull's first front-row start of the entire season. Nobody at Red Bull had expected this. The real target for the weekend had been to close the gap to the top 3 teams, which normally would have meant around 7th on the grid. Second was a different story entirely. The moment carried real weight too. After 3 races of doubt, a month away from the track, and a complete rebuild of the car's steering system, the upgrade had worked. Verstappen compared the feeling to a footballer breaking a goal drought. You can look sharp in training all you want, but it only counts when it happens in a real match. Miami was the match. There is a footnote to Saturday night. Hadjar had qualified 9th, but his car failed the post-session checks. The floor was sticking out 2 millimeters beyond the allowed limit. He was thrown out and sent to the back of the grid, eventually starting from the pit lane. That left Verstappen alongside Antonelli on a clean front row. Sunday's race told a harder story. The start was moved forward 3 hours to dodge thunderstorms. Off the line, fighting Leclerc for position into turn 1, Verstappen ran wide, hit a curb, and spun a full 360 degrees. He floored the throttle and kept going, but dropped to 9th, then fell to 16th after pitting for hard tyres under an early safety car. From there, he drove a long, patient recovery. He briefly led the race on lap 28 during the pit stop cycle, before eventually crossing the line 5th on worn hard tyres. The stewards gave him a 5-second time penalty after the race for crossing the pit exit white line on lap 7. The gap to Lewis Hamilton behind him was nearly 9 seconds, so the penalty did not change his finishing spot. 5th on the road after a lap 1 spin. The strongest race weekend of Red Bull's 2026 season so far, a front-row qualifying lap from Verstappen does not, by itself, prove the car is truly fast. The clearer proof usually comes from the second seat. And here the picture gets tricky. Hadjar had been the more steady Red Bull qualifier in the opening rounds. He even outqualified Verstappen at Suzuka. In Miami, with the same upgrade package bolted onto his car, the gap flipped entirely. He trailed Verstappen by roughly 1 full second in sprint qualifying. After being thrown out of main qualifying and starting from the pit lane, he crashed out of the Grand Prix early. The confusion on his side of the garage was real. Getting through SQ3 was a step forward, but the 1 second gap to Verstappen made no sense to anyone. He had never been more than a tenth off all season when it mattered. Red Bull's Miami upgrade may have widened the sweet spot for a driver who thrives on the knife edge, without making the car any easier for a driver still learning where that edge is. It is a pattern that has followed Verstappen through his career. When Red Bull takes a step forward, the gap within the team often grows. That is a 6-kilogram weight cut, 7 new aero parts, and a rebuilt steering system that makes the car faster for one driver and no easier to drive for the other. Layered underneath all of this is a story Red Bull would rather not be telling. 2 weeks before Miami, during the spring break, news broke that Gianpiero Lambiase, Verstappen's race engineer since 2016 and Red Bull's head of race engineering, is leaving for McLaren. The official plan puts his arrival as chief racing officer no later than 2028. At the end of his current Red Bull contract, Lambiase has been the voice in Verstappen's ear for all 4 of his world titles. In Miami, Mekies went further than anyone expected, openly stating that Lambiase was going to be a team principal at McLaren. McLaren's Zak Brown fired back almost right away, pointing out that McLaren already has a team principal, and a very good one, in Andrea Stella. The 2 bosses reportedly spoke afterwards to clear the air. The bigger reveal was not a single exit. It was a pattern. Red Bull has been losing key people for 3 or 4 years running now, and Mekies did not try to hide it. Adrian Newey, the chief technical officer, left in 2024. Jonathan Wheatley, the sporting director, went to lead the Audi project. Rob Marshall, the engineering director, joined McLaren. Will Courtenay, the head of strategy, followed him. Christian Horner was sacked as team principal. Helmut Marko left by mutual agreement. Craig Skinner, a senior aero figure, walked out. And now Lambiase. The other side of that story is that Red Bull is rebuilding. Pierre Wache leads the car side. The engine program sits under Ben Hodgkinson. And Andrea Landi is coming in from Ferrari to strengthen the team further. The team is being rebuilt around new leaders. The timing still matters. The team that just found a fix for a problem its star driver flagged in January has lost, or is in the process of losing, nearly every senior figure who built its run of titles. Miami proves the new technical team can deliver. The Lambiase exit proves keeping the people who deliver is still the biggest unsolved problem in Milton Keynes. The car still has clear weak spots. The first sector at Miami, which is all high-speed corners, remains a problem. The opening sector at the Miami International Autodrome runs from Turn 1 through a fast-sweeping S-bend complex into the triple apex left of Turns 6 through 8. It is the kind of section where front-end thrust matters more than raw downforce, and where the leftover effects of a suspension built for airflow first still show up. The car is also still too heavy. Red Bull are aiming for another weight cut at either the Austrian or British Grand Prix to finally reach the 768 kilogram minimum, and the calendar is not kind to that weak spot. Imola, Barcelona, Spielberg, Silverstone, all of them have key high-speed sections. Miami may have been the first weekend where the upgraded RB22 was truly fast, but it is also a circuit that partly hides the car's biggest remaining flaw. In Suzuka, Verstappen called the RB22 undrivable. 5 weeks later in Miami, after the rebuilt steering rack and 7 new parts and the Silverstone dress rehearsal, he stood in the media pen and said 6 words that carried more weight than any of the technical data. Now I can at least steer normally again. Whether that is the start of a comeback or a single weekend where everything happened to line up, the next 5 races are about to answer.